where's the weakness of a cloud compute that we have today? And it was always centralization. DePIN, Web3, whatever the hell you want to call it. We knew decentralized compute was going to be the future. I don't care what your acronym is, it's Flux. That's what you're talking about. Flux is a decentralized compute network, the biggest and the baddest in the space. We've got 14,000 plus nodes that run globally, 78 countries. We run front ends, back ends, game servers. We recently implemented WordPress. 45% of the internet runs on WordPress. You can now deploy WordPress sites on Flux as well, all in a completely decentralized manner. It's going to shift the paradigm away from us relying on a couple centralized cloud providers who are a monopoly. Let's say, just say a simple server. On AWS, it's going to cost you around $80. On Google Cloud, that's going to cost you about $176. Microsoft Azure about $116, and Flux $8.52 for 3 servers.
Welcome to the Andy and Friends podcast. I'm your friend Andy, and in this episode, I talk with Daniel Keller, the CEO of Flux. In this episode, we talk all about Flux, what they're doing, we talk about AI and the Deepin Space, why the world needs decentralized compute and other options to the big companies like AWS, Google, Azure, etc., and why getting in right now is still incredibly early and how there are a ton of exciting opportunities out there. This is a great chat, and if you weren't already excited about Flux or just Deepin in general, it should make you very excited. So let's jump in. Okay, and here I am with Daniel Keller. Welcome to the podcast.
Andy, thanks for having me back, brother. I really do appreciate it. It's been so long since I've been on here.
Yeah, I've took a hiatus from doing some podcast stuff, but now I'm trying to hit it back full force. And what better timing? The market seems like it's kind of finally heating up after a long bear market. So before we jump into obviously like Flux stuff, I'm just curious. You're a crypto veteran. You've been in the space for a while. What do you think about what's happening right now in crypto? Where are we at in this cycle? What's the next like year going to look like?
Yeah, man, that's a loaded question, dude. It's crypto. That could change 15 minutes from now, right?
Right.
No, I'm excited. I think we're in a very good time for blockchain. And I'll say blockchain because, often we put emphasis on crypto, but really blockchain adoption is really starting to, excel and grow. And we're starting to see institutional investments, not only in like the assets, the physical assets themselves, but, in the infrastructure. So, it really is a positive thing to see us grow like we have. I mean, where are we going to stop? Nobody knows. I believe this cycle is going to be like no other we've had before in the space. And I've been through a lot of cycles, Andy. This one looks different. There's a lot of it with the institutional investment from ETFs and folks wanting more exposure to, something that isn't fiat that's being, just quantitative eased into the, a completely new world. They're looking for store value. They're looking for somewhere to place their funds. And I think that we're starting to see the real projects that are actually building and developing things start to be the premium scenario. So I think that's one of the things you'll see with DePIN as well.
I agree with everything you said, and that's an interesting take that I've mentioned a little bit, but I feel like this is the first cycle where I feel there is in the general public, there's much more of an awareness of what's been happening with the US dollar specifically and other fiat currencies around the world. I feel like this is the first cycle where that is like top of mind for a lot of people, where they've watched their money and their buying power erode, and now all of a sudden we have this kind of unprecedented access to things like Bitcoin like never before. So yeah, I'm down for the perfect storm for crypto this time around. I'm excited.
We've spent the better part of 13 years approximately trying to explain what store of value is, or deflationary economic models, or Milton Friedman, or so on and so forth. And we were missing the target audience. Why? Because there's 2 forms of adoption. There's natural attrition and there's necessity. And I'd say we're in the latter at this point. So, my kids came to me and they're like, why am I getting paid more and my money's still not, paying my bills. It's like, oh, well, sit down and pull up a chair. We're about to we're about to learn what QE is, right?
Yeah.
So, it really is a necessity at this point, Andy, because people are seeing, some people would say as high as 20%, over 2 years in inflation. They're, neither side of the government, red or blue, is looking to stop it. And as a matter of fact, it seems like they just exacerbate it as they go. I don't think there's any war going on that we don't like being part of, and I think that's starting, create a fright to flight. So they're starting to look, hey, maybe there is something better than, fiat, and the fact that I just keep getting, um, you know, pounded on time and time and time again. So it was cool. I went to DC to speak about, decentralized public infrastructure, Web3, so on and so forth. And the one thing that was common, even in the government sector, is that something has to change. So I was pleasantly surprised when I went to DC for the Global Blockchain Alliance. I spoke at the GBA, and it was totally bizarre to me, but there was a lot of libertarian folks there who really believed in the power of cryptocurrency and what that could mean to the next version of monetary policy. So, bad news is that doesn't necessarily cascade up to Congress or our executive, our chief executive, right? But I think we're just getting started, to be honest with you.
Well, that's really encouraging. Well, Congress and a lot of the political elites are getting older and older and older, and so uh, maybe purely by attrition, to use the word you just said a little while ago, we might have a changing of the guard soon enough that has a little bit more open mindedness to these things. But either way, that's encouraging that there's at least some receptiveness to these newer ideas. And yeah, obviously, if we have Bitcoin spot ETFs approved and things like that, there are some big movements in the space that are an encouraging movement forward. But yeah, I'm down to see what happens next. It's a kind of a big experiment. It's exciting. But the reason I'm having you on is I hear all those thoughts, but also I'm wearing my Flux shirt here, so we got to talk about Flux. So let's start here. If you could briefly, for those listening who don't know what Flux is, explain what Flux is.
Yeah, so Flux is a decentralized compute network, the biggest and the baddest in the space. We've got 14,000 plus nodes that run globally, 78 countries. We run approximately 25,000 plus applications deployed on the network. We run front ends, back ends, game servers. We recently implemented WordPress. So 45% of the internet runs on WordPress. You can now deploy WordPress sites on Flux as well, all in a completely decentralized manner. We also released Flux Edge, which is our first version of the marketplace, and Flux Core, which are our AI rendering and edge compute models. So people that have graphics cards, Flux acts as kind of like the intermediary, completely decentralized, and a choreography between the people that need compute resources and the people that have compute resources. So, with the Nakamoto protocol, there was one thing that kind of worried Satoshi, if you look back at some of his readings, was the fact is, what do we do with all this additional compute resources? Well, Flux figured out that if we use something like proof of use of work and we basically mitigate between consensus mechanism and chain data and use of work, so whether it's AI rendering or so on and so forth, you could do a nice, harmonious, almost symbiotic relationship between those two. So Dan just wants to make some crypto and participate. He downloads Flux Core, he installs it, automatically recognizes his graphics card, says, hey, do you want to participate in proof of use of work? So we're going to mine a crypto now. So Flux, any proof of work, Caspa, Acadia, you name it. You can mine any kind of crypto you want. But when a job comes into the queue, you'll leave, you'll go perform the task, and you'll come back again. And you'll get highly rewarded for the task that you've performed. So we're kind of taking it to AWS. We sat down and we looked at, where's the weakness of a cloud compute that we have today? And it was always centralization. So whether you're talking about, a censorship model, or they just don't like what you're doing, which we've seen like with Parler and so on and so forth, where they're just like, you know what? I don't like your politics and you're not going to run on my platform anymore. That's impossible with Flux. Once it's deployed and into the ethos, it's there. And that brings a host of awesomeness with it, but some challenges as well. So we're working through those pieces. So in a nutshell, anything you can do on a cloud provider today, you can do it on Flux, but you can do it decentralized. You can do it deployed in multiple locations. You can geofence. So if you have, a specific application that has to maybe meet regulatory compliance, you could deploy that in a particular geo area. So you would just basically say, I only want this in the US or the EU or so on and so forth. So we continue to keep growing every single day. So real excited to release our marketplace, which will start to align all those people that have jobs with all those people that have compute resources. So first version alpha just released. It's going really well. Now we're looking into our beta and moving forward in Q2.
Awesome. So there's two key pieces to all that I'd love for you to break down. Can you talk about what the nodes do on the network? Because it is a very I'm a node operator. It's a very impressive number of nodes you have on the network. What do those provide to the network? And then on this new piece that you're launching as a proof of useful work, you have these, what were mining rigs, but now they're more robust and they offer different things. What are those doing?
Yeah, good idea. And a good way to silo it. Really, two different things. You got the Flux OS world, and then you got the Flux Edge, Flux Core world, right? So the Flux OS world, that allows us to basically use enterprise compute that, people like you, Andy, supply. So we benchmark it consistently to make sure it's completely enterprise. So we check our, internet, CPU, hard drive, all that kind of good stuff. We benchmark that persistently to make sure that, it's up, it's available, it stands by. If you fail the benchmark, you become a toaster. So you don't want to fail the benchmark because you miss your reward as well. So these are normal, everyday people that want to participate in this network. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking the idea of like a colo data center and we're sharding that all across the world. Every single one of us become part of that network, and it just kind of continues to keep growing. We have 3 tiers of nodes, our Cumulus, Nimbus, and Stratus. Each one has criteria and also a lockup of Flux to make sure that you can run that infrastructure. We're also going to be adding our Cirrus nodes soon, which are basically our edge compute nodes. And we're just continuing to keep stacking. So our goal was to, when Amazon was created, they built a framework. They started with books, and everybody thought that, Bezos was crazy for who's going to buy books online. But what he was building was a framework for delivery. So whether it's books or socks or Power Wheels, I just bought my grandson a Power Wheels, right? You can order anything off of Amazon. But he built that delivery framework so everything could get dropped in. And that's exactly what Flux did with Flux OS. We built a model where you can deploy front ends, back ends, game servers, WordPress, you name it, and basically it's a delivery model. So if you have it, you build it. Doesn't matter what code you build it in. If you can Dockerize it, you can deploy it on Flux. We also have Kubernetes that we're working on for our Flux core as well. So that's one silo is the node structure. Then the other side is what we call proof of use of work model, Flux Edge, Flux Core. In the end, it'll only be one name. It'll be Flux Edge. We have to differentiate between the different products because proof of use of work is the consensus. Then you have, Flux Core, which is basically the miners and the people participating with the network. And then you have Flux Edge, which is what people use to claim their compute resources, build their compute models, so on and so forth. So eventually, Andy, I know this is confusing as all get out. You'll have 2 products. You'll have Flux Edge and you'll have Flux OS. And between those two, you'll do anything you can do on a modern day VPS provider or GPU provider. You're going to be able to do that with Flux.
Awesome. So I definitely want to dig more into all this stuff more in depth, but I want to zoom out for a second because Flux has a very interesting history. I've been with Flux since the very beginning when it used to be called Zellcash. I found it on Bitcoin Talk Forum when it was announced, and at the time it was basically a just privacy cryptocurrency proof of work. I mean, honestly, there wasn't like tons of big differentiators that made it really unique at the time. It was just one that caught my eye that checked some of the normal boxes. But where it gets really interesting is there was a full pivot. It went from just being a proof of work private cryptocurrency to what you're currently doing, this current model. And I think that was a brilliant move. Obviously, it's working out very well for you.
Thank you.
The direction the market's taken, especially, it seemed like there's a lot of foresight there. So I'm curious, what did you and the team see at the time, or what catalysts were happening at the time that made you go, oh, maybe this, what we were doing originally set out to do isn't the way forward, and then like a lot of very successful companies, startups, made that pivot to where you are today.
Yeah, and that was a hard pivot too, because the community loves the privacy coins and so on and so forth. Andy, I've always took the stance that Flux Flux will have partners that build things and do it well. And there are other projects that do security way better than what we could have. So we had to concentrate on global adoption. And for us to do that, we had to remove any of the barriers that may play into that. Look, Flux is perfectly fine with an open consensus model like Bitcoin, because essentially we're a fork of Bitcoin because we removed the privacy piece. It works for Bitcoin, it works for us because what we're doing is creating these self-sovereign IDs called Flux IDs and assigning to each person that runs on nodes, uses Zelcore, uses different platforms, and allows them to basically traverse the ecosystem with this self-sovereign ID. This is a big deal because we have to understand, for adoption, you have to remove some of the barriers of entry for folks to be built into this. And we weren't going to add an additional piece that we had to maintain, we had to keep up. And let's face it, regulatory wise, that looked like a smart move too, because privacy coins have been taking quite a ding. So for us, we just kind of assessed, what do we want to do with this project? How do we want to do it? We didn't want to be just a fork of a fork. We wanted to come proper, and that's exactly what we did. So the rebrand was probably, it had already been laid out well before what we were doing, and we knew where we were going. DePIN, Web3, whatever the hell you want to call it. We knew decentralized compute was going to be the future. The writing was on the wall. We looked around. We saw these deplatformings. We saw these censorship. We saw the government, digging down deeper. This FISA court and all these other pieces. We're like, man, this is a problem, dude. And what Bitcoin fixes is the fact that it really gives two shits about, and I don't know if I can cuss, sorry. You can cut that
Go
out
for
if
it.
I can. It gives two craps about, what happens. Russia could come out tomorrow and ban Bitcoin. It isn't going to matter. It's not going to stop it. And that's the thing that they have to understand. And that's why we built Flux the way we did. Google's old adage was don't be evil. Because they believe that, other tech companies in the space were taking advantage of their customers. Well, Google's as evil as they come now. So Flux's motto is don't be evil again. And we built it so we could never be evil. I can't sell I can't sell Flux. No one owns it. It is public open source software. And we did it that way methodically so that we could continue to keep growing this thing and make sure that we never, if Dan disappeared tomorrow or something, I got hit by a bus, this project would keep running and keep building and keep growing, and the community would lead it forward. So that's really what our goal was when we set out.
And you said, Web3 or DPIN or whatever the hell you want to call it. I want to know your thoughts here because maybe a year and a half ago or so, I had never heard the phrase DPIN, and yet when I heard about it, I was like, oh, this is all the stuff I'm already in. I like all these projects. So that's kind of emerged out of the ether, the ethos of crypto. What do you think about the name DPIN? Do you like it? Do you think it's helpful?
You know what? Actually, if truth be told, the first time I ever heard the word DPIN was from you. I was like, "Holy shit!" That's a go. We knew what it was, and we called it, our decentralized network. Public network is even better yet. But really, what it came down to is, we have a habit in the crypto space of these acronyms. We just start making acronyms. So whether it's Web3, DPIN, NFTs, whatever the soup du jour is, right? Base reality is it's starting to make the transition to where even if you rename it, it's still the same damn thing, right? And that's how do we bring decentralized infrastructure to the masses, right? How do we take an Airbnb or an Uber, make this an autonomous network running on Flux nodes all across the world? And that's really what it comes down to. And Flux, it doesn't matter what name change they have for us. I think DePIN probably makes the most sense. You know, I like Web3 as well because really, when you look at Flux, it's kind of a Web3 DePIN combo. Um, you know, but in the end, it's just about building a product that works. And then, you know, iteration comes with any good technology. And let's say you have 10,000, you know, S coins out there. You know, probably 99% of those are absolutely worthless, you know, and not to mention all these meme coins and other crap that's out there. So really what it comes down is you're going to have just a few projects that is the people start to have these epiphanies about what the next iteration of technology is, will align right underneath that. So it doesn't, I don't care what your acronym is, it's Flux. That's what you're talking about. So we already cover NFTs, DeFi, fintech, you name it. You just keep going through the list, and it's all a positively built platform is what it comes down to.
Yeah. One of the things that excites me the most about this, emerging, if we want to call it Deepin Space, is, it's the traditional model. If you want to start a company or whatever, is you spend a ton of money, you build up this. If it's going to rely on infrastructure, you build up this infrastructure, or you pay lots of high prices to borrow someone else's infrastructure and stuff. Whereas Deepin is one of the first times we've had where you can start a company and then have all of these people spend the money to buy the infrastructure, to set up the infrastructure, and then you as the company get rewarded by having that infrastructure to then make money from customers. But then the end user who took that risk also makes money in rewards for running the infrastructure. I just think it's this beautiful synergy, this beautiful like relationship that hasn't, and maybe it has existed in some capacity, but it's really truly seeing its full potential, I think, in the world of crypto. So I'm just curious what if that's the most exciting part to you about DPIN, or why you like this space so much.
Chief Information Officer for 25 plus years. I built some of the best infrastructures out there, and never in a million years would I ever thought that somebody else building my infrastructure out and running it for me, and me capitalizing on that, and them capitalizing on that could ever happen. But it's exactly what we're looking at, Andy. It's going to shift the paradigm away from us relying on a couple centralized cloud providers who are a monopoly. They set their own prices. You try running a GPU right now for AI. Good luck. You know what I mean? Like it's impossible. Try buying one. That's even harder yet. So in the end, what it does is it starts to do exactly what Bitcoin did, and that's it starts to incorporate the people that utilize the networks as key resources to building on those networks. So I think eventually a debt center in the, capital world or the operational world of technology becomes a profit center. Yeah, I think about that. You know what I mean? Like if I have infrastructure that I need to have ran, and if I can incentivize the people running it, right? It's going to give back to me. All right. So I'm going to get free infrastructure off that. I mean, Flux is pennies on the dollar. Why is that? Well, because we have people that want to provide those compute resources and in return make Flux on top of that. So I think that hands down is one of the most exciting things that we're watching progress right now. And Andy, we're watching the have and have nots start to equalize, because let's face it, good technology is not cheap. But if good technology is made cheaper because people can provide those resources, all of a sudden the haves up here and the have-nots down here, they start to move to center. And I think that's what you're going to start to see. Like, for instance, we've had a couple companies deploy and say, hey, we really like Flux. We really like what you're doing. But we know it's experimental. Although we haven't been down in 7 years, but who's counting? It's experimental. We're going to launch 30% of our infrastructure, and the other 70% we're going to keep in our Web 2. And then eventually, after a few months, it'll be another 10% and another 10% and another 10%. And it gets down to where it's like, a 30-70 split the other way. Why? Because it works and it's cheap. And they can scale appropriately where they need to. So all of a sudden, those cost centers start to reduce cost. People start to be participatory in your network, which actually becomes a profit center.
Yeah, I think part of the value proposition here that we both kind of talked a little bit about, touched on, is just like how immense the resources available out there are. Like if you have a couple servers or you have mining rigs with a bunch of GPUs and stuff, and you're like, oh, I can provide this to someone can use it and I can make some money. There's no way for you to do that with Amazon or Google or whatever. So now all of a sudden you have all these stagnant resources sitting out there that you can deploy on a network like Flux, which I think is super interesting. So you've mentioned the centralized parties. You talked a couple of points about the advantage of decentralized compute, but maybe expand on that. Why do we need decentralized compute? Why is this so important for the future?
Well, I mean, I think we're looking at it right now. What's happening in the government. Whether you're in Canada and you see Justin Trudeau start to, basically start to censor the news that you get to watch, right? In the States, the FISA courts and what they're doing. They're already starting to ban cloud providers or make everybody KYC, AML KYC through the process so that they can control it. Look at what's happened with the Biden regime and specifically around COVID and the misinformation and the censorship that happened there. We have, and I've said this from the beginning, Andy, and you remember probably very early on, I said there will be a paramount moment. There'll be a paramount event that'll push us to where we start to educate our stuff and realize that we cannot rely on centralized providers. And in the finance space, it was Bitcoin. People realized there is a better way. I would rather trust my data to code than a bunch of people that can unilaterally just decide to inflate your holdings, right? So I think we're at a very interesting time. I think probably the next several years is going to be rocky as we start to get through regulatory clarity and guidance. But you mentioned earlier, Andy, about maybe we won't have this problem much longer. I think 10 years. In 10 years, we will not be even having this discussion. This will be front and center because the majority of the folks coming into the House, coming into the Senate, coming into Congress, so on and so forth, they are a different generation and they're comfortable with digital assets. So I think in the end, what you're going to see is some of the changing of the guard, whether you're red or you're blue, they're going to understand. Right now it's the blue in power, and they're all about no, we got to get rid of Bitcoin. When that shifts all of a sudden, and now the red's in power, if it does happen that way, they're going to worry about it too, and they're going to say, well, maybe Bitcoin isn't a bad idea. So, I think we're starting to really get some real rock solid examples of how crypto and Bitcoin and DePIN and these other protocols are really starting to give lots of value add in different ways.
Yeah. Maybe also it'd be helpful here since we have talked about the centralized ones versus decentralized. You mentioned Google or AWS or Azure or whatever. Can you talk about some specifics? What is if you deploy the same thing on Flux versus one of the centralized? How much cheaper is it? Like how's that deployment look? And talk about a few of the kind of direct advantages versus the centralized ones.
Yeah, I'm gonna wind up real quick for this one. Ready? So we build Flux a little bit different because if you go to a provider like an AWS or a Azure or Google Cloud, so on and so forth, you get really one deployment. There's no built-in continuity planning, no built-in DRP, no built-in, geolocations. If you got to worry about, your bandwidth, all that kind of good stuff. Flux doesn't have any of that. So, for example, if you were deploying a server, let's say, just say a simple server, two virtual cores, 8 gigs of memory, 100 gigabyte of storage. On AWS, it's going to cost you around $80. Okay. On Google Cloud, that's going to cost you about 176. Microsoft Azure about 116, and Flux $8.52 for 3 servers. So we built in redundancy, we built in continuity, scalability, we DRP, so that basically you're sitting in 3 different locations, and it spawns all over the place globally. So you may well have one in the US, one in Asia, one in Europe. And if the one in the US goes down, the operating system will detect that it went down, and it will stand another one up immediately somewhere else. So the redundancy is constantly working between those. So your databases can sync between those three instances. So we built an out of the box setup for people that want to have true infrastructure with plenty of policies and procedures built behind it. So, we have internal SLAs for service level agreements for ourselves that we try to meet. As I mentioned earlier, we've been going solid for 7 years. There's not too many people out there. I don't even know. I had a Windows computer run for 3.5 years one time. I think it was Windows 95 or Windows 98. I can't remember which. But that's pretty damn good to have a whole network run like that. And because it's built on the fundamental underpinnings of Bitcoin, that's rock solid, blockchain disbursement that people are participating in. So the surface area gets negated, and your data's where you need it when you need it.
And how do you ensure the Flux network, not just the miners and stuff, but also who's providing the nodes and who's providing this decentralized compute? How do you ensure, or how do you incentivize, or what mechanisms are in place to keep that decentralized?
So we have it's a proof of work product. I mean, we would always be proof of work, ASIC resistant. We don't believe in ASICs. We don't believe in any of that crap. This is, Flux is for the people, by the people. Whether you're mining it, you're decentralized. Whether you're running a node, you're decentralized. Everything is the finality always goes back to the blockchain. So you think of like the miners, that's kind of our layer one. You think of the node infrastructure, that's kind of our layer two. But the final finality is all on the blockchain to make sure that everything gets, is there in perpetuity. So it constant work on decentralization is always there, Andy, because we're building stuff that didn't exist before. I'll give you, for instance, two-factor authentication. Sounds benign enough, right? Sounds pretty simple, 2FA. Google runs 2FA, or whoever runs 2FA, right? So we had to build a decentralized two-factor authentication, something that allowed us to validate to the blockchain that it is who you say you are, and that you are able to access particular files or whatever it is. So, self-sovereign ID, we had to build that out, the Flux ID. Everything that seems simple in Web 2 is much more complex in Web 3 because it has to have that reduced surface area for people to mess with it. Has to be decentralized.
And then, so let's say someone's running something on Flux, an app or a website or whatever, and let's say a government in some country doesn't like that thing, and like, what if they try to ask you to take it down or try to ban it? Like, what does that process look like? How are you resistant to that? How does that work?
That's a question of the year, right? The one thing about Flux is once it's deployed on Flux, it's there forever. So it does change the way that regulatory bodies start to handle content like this. It's more they have been reactionary for the better part of as long as technology has existed. If they don't like what you're doing, they're going to give you a subpoena, they'll give you a Wells notice, they'll give you a cease and desist, whatever it is, and then there has to be a reaction to that. Flux can't react to that. Dan can't take anything off Flux once it's been deployed. So they have to start looking, and this is why I went to DC, they have to start looking at being proactive, which means our governments have to actually build this technology and understand this technology as they go so that they can meet pace with what we're doing. Because if you send a takedown notice to Flux, there's nothing we can do about it. Not a damn thing. Send it back and say, but I will mention this, just because it's decentralized doesn't mean it's lawless. And every application you sign on the Flux blockchain with your Flux ID, which is a pseudo-anonymous ID that ties it directly back to you. So they don't know who you are, but they know what wallet it came from and which ID it used, right? And people like Chainalysis will build technologies to make sure they understand who is deploying what and when and how. It's an open blockchain, public ledger. So, like the old adage, F around and find out. You know what I mean?
Right.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Because the only person that ends up paying in the end is the person who deployed it.
Yep. So to switch gears here a little bit, Flux is at a $330 million market cap. The entire DePIN space by market cap is about 28 or 29 billion. Like how much money is at stake here? How much like how big is the addressable market cap for the DePIN or decentralized compute? Like how big can this grow, or where's this going?
Trillions. I mean, seriously, when you think about it, I mean, just the standard compute market. If you look at that, Flux takes a 1% or 2% hold in that market, which is our, ultimately our goal. That changes the paradigm, and that shift begins quickly. I mean, we're already starting to see folks like Google laying off people, starting to outsource their data, all that kind of stuff. Well, that's terrifying to begin with. First of all, it was terrifying that they had the data to begin with. Second of all, now we're going to start outsourcing it to other countries. I mean, this is just a mess waiting to happen. So the true power of Flux really starts to play in. You got Together AI. Nvidia just dumped, I think, 100 million into that company, well over $1 billion in evaluation. I think the best kept secret in blockchain is about to be known. And there's very few projects that are building something like we're building. Most of them are fancy and pretty and all that kind of stuff. We don't care about any of that. We're a pure infrastructure play. We want to be the go-to for everybody that's deploying their decentralized, info. So I think over the next several years, Andy, I think you're going to see that market explode. And it's let's face it, Andy. What is the number one question you get when somebody asks you about blockchain? What's it do?
What's it
Right?
do, or how do
What
I
does it
make money
do?
with it?
What does it do? What does it do? How does it right? Well, Flux
What is it?
answers
Yeah.
that question. It does it all. It does, the front ends, back ends, game server, the whole 9 yards. So we finally are at a point where when my mom asks me, she says, "What does Flux do?" And I say, "What do you know what Amazon is?" Yes. Do you know they have a product called AWS? Yes. I said it does everything like that, except the people are the engine that make it go. Oh, I understand that. Okay, so you're like a cloud provider. Yeah, okay. So I think we're finally getting to the point where we have some teeth with what we're saying, and we're actually able to explain what we're doing a little better.
Yeah, and I agree. And yeah, if anybody listening thinks, Dan is crazy here and trillions, what? Excuse me. I mean, I just read a Masari report a month or two ago that their estimation just over the next few years is $5 trillion for the DePIN market cap. I mean, look at Nvidia. Nvidia is one single company, a very successful, a very important
What, 2
company.
trillion?
2.3 trillion dollar
Yeah.
market cap for one single company. And this Deepin Space and crypto encompasses, well, at this point, hundreds of companies. We'll see which ones actually, survive and rise to the top. But it's so early. It's so microscopic right now. It's just, there's so much potential there. And the entire world is still waking up to this whole idea of blockchain and this new technology and crypto at large. And as it gains more and more adoption, we will erode those market caps. We will grab onto some of that market share. I think it's inevitable.
Rising tide lifts all boats. And the other thing you have to look at too is I think we're in the midst of a Sam Altman from OpenAI. I dislike that guy with every fiber of my being, but he actually said something the other day that I found was quite useful. He said that compute resources as we know them today become the new gold rush, and I believe that wholeheartedly. For us, there's in the human race, there's these these pivotal jump points, right? So let's say pivotal jump point was right around the time the internet was formed. We started seeing a .com boom. So pivotal jump point, boom. Now we have Web 1, the reads, right? And then there's another pivotal. It started to go into clouds, and then it's the read writes. Well, now you're going into read write own, and I think that this is going to be where the gold rush is, because for us to get to the next point, the exponential growth point, you need compute resources. Well, guess what's a finite resource? As finite as it gets right now, compute resources. So I think the projects that have thought about this holistically, built the business cases and the use cases that make sense to grow into. I mean, Flux is, I call Flux, Flux isn't necessarily a blockchain project. It's a tech project that happens to utilize a blockchain. So, whether it's healthcare, supply chain management, AI, rendering, whatever it is, we can be having exposure to that area and a growth model to that area and an incentivization to that model.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's lots of people default to Bitcoin is 15 years old. Why isn't it why don't we use it every day? Why isn't it totally mainstream at this point? Flux, Flux was came out in 2018. It's almost 7 years old. Why isn't everybody hosting their stuff on Flux at this point? What you just said, Dan, like the internet was invented in the 60s. We didn't even only the
By
nichest of
Al
the
Gore.
niche, like
By Al Gore.
yeah,
Don't forget
by
that.
Al Gore, by Al Gore. Only the most super nerd of nerd people were even using it in the 80s. Like we didn't start seeing it in homes mainstream to even like a small fraction till the 90s and late 90s. It was the 2000s when it really, I mean, we're just, 50 to 60 years
Very
from that
early on.
invention.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like it just takes these types of technologies that are going to change the world as we know it take time. It's not an overnight thing. And sorry, but 15 years is kind of overnight when it comes to these kind of
Oh
massive
yeah.
shifts. So
Yeah.
we've yeah.
But
But
here's
one
the
thing
other.
you did
Here's
talk
the
about.
other. Hold on, Andy. Here's the other
Oh, go
point
ahead.
too.
Yeah.
Is that growth model, that internet growth model, was a problem looking for a solution. Our growth model has been, a problem that is not receptive to a solution, right? So, you don't see, the government or finance running out there and be like, "Oh, Bitcoin, we love you, bro. Come in here." No, it's more how do we stymie these guys or kill growth models or totally anti-USA stuff, right? I mean, we were known for our tech sector and understanding technology was growing and adopting it very quickly. Well, we just kind of went the other way. But I do believe that as we continue to keep growing, that the adoption just creeps growing on that. And the other thing is if you look at something like, let's say, in Africa, you look at telephone lines. Okay. That adoption curve was like this. It was flat because they couldn't deliver the infrastructure the way that they wanted to deliver it in third world countries. And then along comes cellular. Whoop, there you go, right? Parabolic growth model. And it's going to be the same way for us. The first version that we build a blockchain may not be the adoptive version. It may look a lot like Flux for the adopted version, so you think, okay, well, Bitcoin's the landlines, Flux is the mobile phones. And then I'm sure there'll be, supporting pieces in between there. But yeah, it's an exciting growth process. That's for sure.
One thing you have talked about a few times here, we've mentioned is AI. Flux is not an AI project, but AI is one of those areas of technology right now that has me really excited to hold Flux because the demand for just compute, just to support all these companies that are trying to do all this AI stuff or who want to build AI models and all this stuff is immense. So, two-part question here. One, what do you think about AI? Is it a bubble? And is there something there? And then two, what is that? I mean, how are you thinking about AI from the perspective of Flux and your growth over the next several years?
Well, don't let my team don't let them know that you don't think they're an AI project because they fully believe they're an AI project, and
Hey,
and
I
they,
support it.
and rightfully so because Andy, go back to the conversation we had about building that delivery model framework. So Amazon sold books, now they sell everything, right? Flux has built out this network infrastructure that basically you can start laying all this topology on top of it. So, for instance, we're building our own AI client. It's called DibiFetch AI. It's an open source, completely open source model. So the training models are all based on open source content. So anybody can participate it. The outputs are not construed. Like if you look at a ChatGPT or a Google Bard or whatever it is, I mean, oh my God, look at the mess Google had. Changed every single person history to a black person. You know what I mean? Like I'm fine with that, but what the hell? You know what I mean? That's not history. So they skewed those input models, okay? And then the output models were exactly what they wanted them to be. And we don't want that in the future. We want things to be open source. We want everybody to be able to participate. We want everybody to be able to understand what the algorithms are. They can verify the algorithms. They can verify what changed in the algorithms. These are all open source pieces that they should be open source to begin with. So I am really excited for what Flux, and we have an entire team that's dedicated. I think it's 5 people now for building out Flux AI. And I got my first demo of it 2 weeks ago, and I was blown out of the water. I actually let my daughter use it for her homework. It was pretty damn good. And I was impressed. And you're going to see that come out in alpha probably within the next, several weeks. And so it's, it's easy for us to spin off particular pieces because we've already built the framework. So we were literally sitting in a meeting with all the people sitting around us said, hey, we should build our own AI model. I'm using ChatGPT and blah, blah, blah. Input models are skewed. Bar's horrible, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, then let's go ahead and build our own. 2 weeks later, we had our first demo, right? So I think AI is not a hype cycle. I think the way AI is today is okay. It's getting there. AI in 5 years is going to blow your mind, and we're not ready for what is about to be released from Pandora's box, right? So I think we're going to have some real challenges, especially around deep fakes, and I've been screaming at the top of my lungs for this forever. And by the way, part of that AI component is to build out Mayhem, which is basically a deepfake detector, because that doesn't exist today. It does. There are some that are not very good at what they do, but there needs to be a yin to the yang, and that's where Flux comes into play. We can dedicate community groups, or we can dedicate community resources to building out these platforms now. Or, Andy, we wait till somebody else build it and we take it. And we have them deployed on Flux, which is the best way to do it, because then we don't have any heavy lift in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think AI is here to stay. Maybe, we're gonna have a cool off period where the hype, it builds and builds and builds. We have a normal correction that's healthy and everything for the space. But yeah, I think it's crazy to have the idea in your head that AI is just a fad. It's it's not going where it's like, obviously,
No.
if you just have if you have any concept of what history of technology looks like, it's here to stay.
Yep.
So, you know, obviously there's a big demand there. That's going to be a growing market. The DePIN space, especially decentralized compute, is a robust aspect of the crypto and blockchain market right now. You're not alone. There's other people doing this. Whenever I post a video and I talk about Flux or something, people ask me, what do you think about ICP? What do you think about Render? What do you think about some of these names? So, Dan, I'm not asking for you to like publicly, go on a rant about what you think about the competition, but generally speaking, what do you think about the competition, and how does Flux differentiate itself, and why should people consider Flux over one of the many litany of other compute projects?
Try to get me in trouble, aren't you?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think everybody has to do their own due diligence. I think some of the projects that you mentioned, like an ICP and a Render, I think you really need to look deeply at what they're doing from their technological standpoint. Are they truly decentralized? Is their technology adequate enough to make it into the next version of what DePIN will be, and what what AI will require, or other compute resources will require? I like Akash. I like Greg Azori. I don't like necessarily their tokenomics model, but I like the technology as a whole. And I've said this before. I don't look at competition. I look at opportunity. So for instance, when we were working on deploying Grok, I guess it was the Twitter AI piece, we wanted to test it out. We were still in the process of building out our marketplace, so we only had a few, H100s and so on and so forth, and we needed a few. So I hit Greg up and said, "Hey, Greg, can you, allocate us a few, H100s we want to deploy, and we want to get Grok running?" Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you'll see is it's going to take more than Flux to get all of us to the next version of the internet. So I think, you'll see an Akash, you'll see storage, you'll see Filecoin, you'll see each one of them has like a very specific thing that they're doing, whereas Flux kind of acts as the marketplace to choreography all of these pieces. So I do believe you'll see a day where when you open up the Flux Edge marketplace, you'll see Akash. I do believe you'll see, maybe a Core AI, or, a storage, and we've got some stuff coming up to talk about with those guys. So, I mean, I think it's an opportunity for us all to work together. You look at an assembly line, Andy, and it's not one person that's building every aspect of that vehicle. right? It's lots of people all over the world who have built it, and they bring it to one place for assembly. So I think that's what it's going to look like for Flux and for the space overall. And it works both ways. You could definitely see an Akash use overflow infrastructure that Flux has. You could see Bard running on Flux. You could see, Elon's Grok running on Flux in an open source manner. So I think what it really gets down to is I don't necessarily know that there is competition or anybody doing things the way we're doing, and we like it that way because we can work with other projects and we can include them right into what we're building on Flux.
Yeah, I agree. But I think when I hear people, ask me about this one or that one, or they say, why are you in, the X, Y, and Z? This one's clearly the better one. And I'm like, maybe like we don't know what the experiment looks like in a decade, what's going to end up being the, all the true winners and stuff. But I think the important thing that most people miss is just how big this space is and how it's not a zero sum game. It's not
Yeah.
like there has to be a single winner.
Yeah.
It's like Flux can win and so can pretty much all the other ones
Yes.
if this thing actually takes off. So I think it's really unhelpful and unproductive when people get super tribalistic about this.
Amen.
I'm all in on this one crypto, and that's, if this one doesn't succeed, it's my entire like identity and stuff. It just seems very dangerous to me, which is why I like, this attitude that you're talking about here, which is, hey, we can see what the pros and cons to the other ones are, but also we can all probably just win if we are successful in our own ways. But like you also said, do your own damn research, like
Yeah.
figure out what is actually a good
Yes.
fit for you, because some of them, they might succeed, they might make you money, but you might not like what they're doing. So you might like a different one better, which I think is a really helpful way to, if only we could all just be more reasonable, Dan, right?
Yeah, that's one thing you have a shortage of in the crypto space, Andy, is being reasonable. The bottom line is this: you're still damn early, and if you're willing to do your research and take your time and stop playing with meme coins and so on and so forth, you're gonna get into a project long term. And let's face it, I made the majority of my money before crypto, right? So I invested wisely. And what did I invest in? Did I invest in projects or did I invest in people? I invested in people. And one of the greatest two of the greatest gifts that Satoshi Nakamoto gave us was, one, he penned the Bitcoin white paper, and two, he went away. There was no somebody leading the project, so on and so forth. Bitcoin grew without a marketing campaign. It grew without, strategic direction. It grew without all these things. I think we'll eventually get to the point with a lot of these other projects as well. You'll have people. So I suggest look at, are your core devs and your team, are they doxxed? If it's some dude sitting chilling in his basement who's running a voice filter when he talks online, yeah, you're probably going to get wrecked on that. That's not going to work. So there isn't a project out there, Andy, other than maybe ICP that I'd work with every one of them. I would absolutely work with every one of them. So other than ICP.
I share some. I've left comments on my channel about that one in particular, but we can leave that for a different day. So we've talked a lot about utility nodes in here and running these rigs and proof of useful work and making money and stuff. Maybe get a little bit more specific here at the end, because I know lots of people at the end of the day, they want to know, how can I make money? And Flux, thankfully, has quite a few different ways to make money. So what would be some like next steps that people, if they like what you have to say, they're interested in Flux, they want to make some money with Flux, they want to get involved, what can they do?
Man, I tell you what, there is no project like any other project like Flux. Because you can make money just about every way. You can run infrastructure, right? So you run nodes, you're making Flux. If you run mining equipment, you're making Flux. Or you can trade, you can make Flux. Every single way that you can do it. We're looking at progressive node rewards now as well. So as the demand for the network goes up, the amount of money that you're going to make is going to go up. You can download Flux Core and start to mine any coin you want. If it's mineable, you can mine it, and you can also participate in Flux Edge proof of use of work model as well. So you get tapped and make extra money. So really, and you can stake. We have our own on-chain staking model. It's called Titan. There's like so many ways to make Flux. We made it so you really can mine with your mind. Go out there, find your talent, and you can build on that. Come in and help out with the community. I mean, that's a great way to make some Flux. We always have bounties. We always have rewards that we're doing. I mean, it really, honestly, Andy, you're only limited by how much work you want to put in. You know what I mean? Like you and I know we put in a lot of work to get where we're at, and it's good to be there. But you know, we have to pass that on and educate other people how to do it as well.
And then here at the end, I'd love to just do one look forward. So we've got the rest of 2024 in front of us, 2025 coming next year, which hopefully this next 9 to 24 months is a very exciting one for all of us who are still in crypto and haven't given up. What's coming for Flux next? What are you the most excited about? What should we be looking for in the project coming forward?
Marketplace beta is going to be in Q2, so we're going to get it somewhere here real soon. That'll allow people to start getting paid for their use for work model, and then it'll ramp up very quickly. We're going to spend the rest of the year cleaning up. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. We want to polish Edge so that it's we can start handing this out to universities, enterprises, so on and so forth, so that they understand what it is. And you're going to see some big partnerships come down the pike. I mean, we're not sitting on our ass waiting for somebody to come use Flux. We're going out and we're beating on doors and we're kissing babies and all that kind of good stuff. So, I think you're going to see some really big partners come on board. People will start to understand the value of what Flux is. And let's face it, man, like, not too many people understand that you can have 0.00000001 flux. They only think of it as, if they're mining or running nodes or whatever they're doing, is one flux. But in reality, this network is going to get much, much, much bigger. The other thing we're going to be looking at is our halving coming up. So we'll have an actual chain halving, and then we'll have a collateral halving as well. Get so confused with that. So what does that mean? The amount to stake a node is going to go down. More ability for people to get into the network. We'll have progressive node rewards coming online as well to make sure that if you're deploying, that you're making a fair wage, whether it's nodes or mining, so on and so forth. So, I mean, this, by far, we've worked 7 years to get to this point, and the next 6 months is going to be where the magic happens. And we're ready for that, too. We've already started our advertising campaign. We sponsored two UFL teams. We've started Flux Racing Team, which is currently sponsoring 2 sprint cars, and we're adding... we're just adding a nice augmentation to that as well. So, I mean, we love... The racing fans are really involved, and so on and so forth. We hired Kite Rocket, which is our marketing and PR team now. We're ramping it up, man. We'll be refining and tuning and building this thing out so it feels like it's been here forever.
Love it. Okay, lots of exciting stuff. I know that there will be a lot of people, especially who have been interested in nodes, to know that there will be a collateral halving. Because last time, do entry level node once upon a time was 10,000 flux, and then Flux's price got kind of crazy, and then that dropped to 1,000 flux. So now it's all of a sudden way more accessible. I'm sure Flux's price is going to get crazy again, and then cut that in half or something, and that'll be very nice. So lots of exciting stuff to look forward to. But yeah, this was fun, Dan. We'll do this again. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on as usual. And if anybody listen wants to check us out, runonflux.io. You can follow us on Twitter at runonflux. You can follow me if you like the rantings of a crazy old man. It's at DAK_Flux. Come check it out. Download Flux Core and start mining and making some Flux or whatever crypto you'd like today. So check us out.
I will link to everything Dan just mentioned and more down in the description. But if you're listening in, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.